I'm bailing out, but there's a catch. I've got no parachute. What do you think the next world's like? I'll know soon enough anyway. I'm signing off now, June.
Sean, what's wrong, love?
I've been picked on 3 times today. All because of my trousers.
One of these was made for less than the catering budget on a mid-tier Hollywood production, and depicts working-class life with such unflinching honesty that American test audiences found it incomprehensible. One uses structural experimentation that would never survive studio script development. And one addresses class warfare so directly that multiple American distributors refused to release it, despite critical acclaim. Number 11. Naked, 1993. Mike Leigh made this one for British Screen and Thin Man Films with a budget of approximately £1,600,000 and delivered what remains the most scabrous and most verbally ferocious examination of Thatcherite Britain's moral collapse ever committed to film. David Thewlis plays Johnny, a homeless Manchester drifter who arrives in London and spends several days wandering through the city, delivering extended philosophical rants about the meaninglessness of existence to anyone unfortunate enough to encounter him. The film was shot with Liab's signature improvisational method, where actors developed characters through months of workshop before a single frame was filmed. What makes Naked impossible for Hollywood to replicate is not the low budget, which American independent cinema can match, but Lee's process-driven approach that requires abandoning screenplay and predetermined structure in favor of character development through improvisation. American studio filmmaking, and even most American independent production, requires an approved screenplay before financing is released. Lee's method makes that impossible because the screenplay emerges from the improvisational process rather than existing before it. The financial risk this represents is unacceptable to American production companies that need to predict costs and control outcomes. Beyond the production method, the film's protagonist is genuinely unpleasant in ways American cinema rarely permits. Johnny is intelligent and articulate, and also abusive, misogynistic, and cruel. He rapes a woman early in the film, and the film neither punishes him for it nor redeems him afterward. He simply continues being exactly who he is. American screenwriting conventions require character arcs where protagonists learn and change. Johnny learns nothing and changes not at all. He ends the film as damaged as he began it. The film's dialogue is extraordinarily dense and literary, with Johnny delivering monologues about postmodern philosophy, biblical apocalypse, and capitalist alienation that run for minutes without interruption. American film dialogue tends toward naturalism and economy. Lee's characters speak in extended poetic rants that no actual person would deliver, but that capture interior states more accurately than naturalistic speech. That stylization combined with thick regional accents makes the film genuinely difficult for American audiences to parse, which American studios consider disqualifying regardless of artistic achievement. The film won Best Director and Best Actor at Cannes, and received widespread critical acclaim in Britain, while barely receiving American theatrical release. Fine Line Features distributed it in limited markets where it made approximately $1,700,000, essentially invisible by American commercial standards. The film that British critics recognized as a masterpiece simply did not translate culturally or commercially to the American market, which demonstrates the specific gap between British and American cinema that makes certain kinds of filmmaking impossible to replicate across the Atlantic. Hello, number 10, Kia's, 1969.
Where are you, Casper?
I don't know, sir.
I know! You were! You were asleep! Why were you asleep? You irreverent scoundrel!
Don't know.
Ken Loach made this one for Woodfall Film Productions with a budget of approximately £165,000 and delivered the most class-conscious and most regionally specific film British cinema produced in the 1960s, a movie about a working-class boy in Yorkshire who finds temporary meaning through training a kestrel while the education system, his family, and economic circumstances systematically destroy any possibility of escape from poverty. The The film was shot on location in Barnsley using primarily non-professional actors speaking in dialects so thick that the film was subtitled for American release, and even then remained largely incomprehensible to audiences unfamiliar with Yorkshire working-class life. What makes Kes impossible for Hollywood to replicate is its absolute commitment to regional and class specificity, without any concession to broader accessibility. The film is not about universal boyhood or timeless coming of age. It is about this specific boy in this specific place at this specific moment in British economic history, when coal mining was declining and working-class communities were being abandoned by both Labour and Conservative governments. That specificity is the source of the film's power, and also what makes it completely untranslatable to American context. American cinema occasionally depicts working-class or poor characters, but almost always positions them within narratives of upward mobility or escape. The poor boy discovers he can sing or play basketball, or is secretly brilliant, and uses that gift to transcend his circumstances. Kes refuses that framework entirely. Billy Casper will not escape. His kestrel will be killed by his brother out of spite. He will leave school and work in the mines or in some other form of manual labor that will grind him down exactly as it ground down his father. The film presents this as inevitable rather than as tragic, which is more honest and more despairing than American audiences are trained to accept. The non-professional casting, while generating extraordinary naturalistic performances, creates actors who cannot be marketed as stars and who have no career trajectory beyond this specific film. Hollywood's economic model depends on building actors into marketable commodities who can open subsequent films. British social realism uses people and discards them, because the people matter less than the authenticity they provide to the specific moment being documented. That approach is antithetical to how the American film industry operates. The film's ending, in which Billy buries his dead kestrel and returns to his unchanged circumstances, provides no catharsis or hope. American test audiences would reject this ending overwhelmingly, and studio development would require adding some moment of possibility or resilience. Loach refused all such compromises throughout his career, which is why his films are essential British cinema, and why they barely exist in American consciousness, despite his Palme d'Or wins and his unquestionable importance to world cinema. Number 9, Withnail and I, 1987.
The plan. We get them there and get wrecked. Then we'll eat a pork pie, and we'll drop a couple of 7s or 50s each. Means we'll miss out money.
Bruce Robinson wrote and directed this one for Handmade Films with a budget of approximately £1,100,000 and delivered the most quotable and most specifically British comedy about failure, alcoholism, and the death of 1960s counterculture. Richard E. Grant and Paul McGann play two unemployed actors in 1969 London who escape to a country cottage and discover that rural poverty is worse than urban poverty while consuming heroic quantities of alcohol and other substances. The film is structured as decline rather than as quest, depicting the gradual recognition that the dreams of the 1960s have curdled into the disappointments of the 1970s. What makes Withnail and I impossible for Hollywood to replicate is that its celebration of articulate failure and its refusal to punish or redeem its alcoholic protagonist. Withnail is a drunk and a narcissist and a parasite, and the film loves him anyway, finding in his theatrical self-destruction something genuinely poetic rather than pathetic. American addiction narratives require either recovery or cautionary tale. Withnail does neither. He simply continues drinking, and the film ends with him alone in the rain reciting Hamlet to wolves in the zoo, which is presented as both absurd and somehow noble. The dialogue is extraordinarily literary and theatrical, with characters delivering insults and complaints and philosophical observations in complete sentences with subordinate clauses. Nobody speaks like this in reality, but everyone in British theater training speaks like this when they are drunk and miserable, which gives the film cultural specificity that American audiences lack context to fully appreciate. The humor depends on understanding British class markers, British theatrical tradition, and British relationship to intoxication as acceptable social behavior. The film was a commercial failure on release, making approximately £1,500,000 in Britain and barely receiving American distribution. It subsequently became an enormous cult success through home video and repertory screenings, with fans memorizing entire scenes and quoting them endlessly. That cult status depends on self-selecting audiences willing to engage with the film's specific cultural references and theatrical style, which mainstream American audiences have shown no interest in acquiring. Richard E. Grant gives a performance so theatrical and so excessive that it should not work in cinema, but does because Robinson's direction commits completely to the same excess. American acting training emphasizes naturalism and emotional truth. British theater training emphasizes voice, language, and the ability to deliver absurd dialogue with complete conviction. The gap between those traditions is what makes Withnail possible, and what makes Hollywood replication impossible without fundamentally changing what the film is. Number 8. This Is England, 2006.
Sean, what's wrong, love?
I've been picked on 3 times today. All because of my trousers.
Shane Meadows made this one for Warp Films, Film 4, and Screen Yorkshire with a budget of approximately £1,500,000 and delivered the most honest and most emotionally complex film about British working-class youth radicalization, racism, and the violence that simmers underneath communities abandoned by economic restructuring. The film follows Sean, a 12-year-old boy in 1983 England, who was adopted by a skinhead gang and gradually drawn into the National Front's racist ideology before confronting the moral cost of that affiliation. The film depicts racism and violence from inside the communities that produce it, rather than from comfortable external judgment. What makes This Is England impossible for Hollywood to replicate is its refusal to simplify the skinhead characters into cartoons or monsters, instead showing them as fully human people whose racism emerges from economic desperation, cultural displacement, and the seductive appeal of belonging to something larger than themselves. American films about racism require clear moral binaries where racists are obviously evil and anti-racists are obviously good. Meadows shows that people can be kind to their friends, loving to their families, and virulently racist simultaneously, and that understanding how those contradictions coexist is more important than simply condemning them. The film's depiction of a 12-year-old being recruited into racist ideology would be considered too sensitive for Hollywood to approach without didactic messaging and clear condemnation. Meadows trusts his audience to understand that showing how radicalization works is not endorsing it, and that depicting a child absorbing racist ideas requires presenting those ideas as the child hears them, rather than as adults recognize them. That trust in audience intelligence is rare in American cinema, which tends to underline moral positions and guide interpretation explicitly. The regional specificity is again crucial. This is not about generic racism or universal extremism. This is about the specific conditions of post-industrial English Midlands towns in the early 1980s, where Margaret Thatcher's economic policies had destroyed traditional industries and left working-class communities with no economic prospects and no political representation. The National Front's racism provided explanation for that abandonment and enemy to blame, which made it genuinely appealing rather than simply evil. American cinema could not depict that appeal without being accused of sympathizing with it. The film's child actors, particularly Thomas Turgoose as Sean, give naturalistic performances that could only be achieved through Meadows' documentary-style direction, and through casting actual working-class kids rather than trained child actors. Hollywood child acting tends toward precocious Polish rather than raw authenticity, and the gap between those approaches creates different kinds of films with different relationships to truth and performance. Number 7. Tyrannosaur, 2011.
I've met people all my life. Goody goodies. Make a charity record. Bake a cake. You know it.
Paddy Considine wrote and directed this one for Warp Films, Inflammable Films, and Film 4, with a budget of approximately £1,500,000 as his directorial debut, and delivered the most unsparing and most emotionally devastating examination of domestic violence, rage, and the possibility of connection between damaged people that British cinema has produced. Peter Mullen plays Joseph, a violent alcoholic widower whose rage destroys everything around him, and Olivia Colman plays Hannah, a charity shop worker who appears middle class and religious, but is trapped in a horrifically abusive marriage. The film watches these two damaged people form unlikely connections while violence threatens to consume them both. What makes Tyrannosaur impossible for Hollywood to replicate is its commitment to depicting working-class male violence without psychological explanation or redemptive arc, showing Joseph as genuinely dangerous person whose rage is not caused by childhood trauma or external circumstance, but simply is who he is. American cinema requires explaining violence through backstory that makes it comprehensible and therefore manageable. Considine refuses that comfort. Joseph is violent because he is violent, and the film asks whether someone that is damaged can form genuine human connection, or whether violence is all he has. The film's depiction of Hannah's abuse is among the most graphic and most unbearable in cinema, not because it shows explicit violence, but because it shows the psychological aftermath with such precision and such commitment to Coleman's performance that watching it becomes genuinely painful. American films about domestic violence tend toward either exploitation or inspiration, depicting abuse graphically to shock or depicting survival as triumph. Tyrannosaurs do neither. It simply shows what living with constant threat of violence does to someone's ability to exist in the world. The performances by Mullen and Coleman are so raw and so emotionally exposed that they feel almost documentary, which is partly a function of Considine's trust in his actors and partly a function of British acting tradition's comfort with ugliness and discomfort that American tradition tends to aestheticize or soften. The film contains extended scenes of characters simply existing in their misery, without dialogue or action, trusting that watching damaged people breathe is sufficient drama if the damage is real enough. The ending provides no clear resolution or comfort, suggesting only that connection between damaged people is possible without healing or fixing anyone. American screenwriting requires earned optimism or tragic catharsis. Tyrannosaur refuses both, ending with ambiguity that some viewers will read as hopeful and others will read as merely postponing inevitable violence. That ambiguity is honest to how domestic violence actually operates and is completely alien to American narrative conventions. Number 6, Secrets and Lies, 1996.
Looking bleeder. Walks like a crab.
Every family has them.
Mike Leigh made this one for Thin Man Films, Sci-Fi 2000, and Film 4 with a budget of approximately £4,500,000, and delivered the most emotionally precise and most structurally patient examination of family secrets, class boundaries, and racial identity that British cinema produced in the 1990s. Brenda Blethyn plays Cynthia, a white working-class woman whose life is upended when Hortense, a successful black optometrist, played by Marianne Jean-Baptiste, contacts her, revealing she is the daughter Cynthia gave up for adoption decades earlier. The film follows their gradual connection and the eventual family gathering where the secret is revealed with consequences that ripple through every relationship. What makes Secrets and Lies impossible for Hollywood to replicate is Leigh's improvisational method extended to featured length, creating scenes that run 10 or 15 minutes without cuts as characters navigate difficult conversations in real time. The phone call sequence in which Cynthia and Hortense first speak runs nearly 6 minutes of continuous dialogue with the camera simply observing as these two women feel their way through impossible situations. American cinema would cut that scene into manageable segments, using close-ups and reaction shots to guide audience emotion. Leigh holds wide and lets the awkwardness breathe, because the awkwardness is the content. The film's treatment of race is specifically British in ways that would not translate to American context. Hortense is middle-class professional, while Cynthia is working-class manual laborer, which means the racial dynamic is complicated by class in ways that American racial discourse typically refuses to acknowledge. The film never explains how Cynthia came to have a black daughter, trusting audiences to infer rather than provide backstory, which American screenwriting would consider an unacceptable gap in information. Brenda Blethyn's performance, which won Best Actress at Cannes and received an Academy Award nomination, is so emotionally raw that watching it feels intrusive. The scene where Cynthia explains to her brother Maurice why she gave Hortense up for adoption is so painful and so sustained that American test audiences would reject it as too uncomfortable. Lee refuses to protect audiences from emotional difficulty, which is fundamental to his entire approach and completely opposed to Hollywood's commercial imperatives. The film's structure builds toward the family barbecue where secrets will be revealed, but that revelation happens at the 90-minute mark in a 140-minute film, leaving 50 minutes to explore consequences rather than treating revelation as climax. American three-act structure would place the revelation at the end of the second act, with the third act focused on resolution. Lee's structure treats revelation as beginning rather than end, prioritizing aftermath over event. Number 5. The Long Good Friday, 1980.
Outside a church, not on Good Friday.
Harold Shand, undisputed king of London's underworld. Now he's setting up...
John Mackenzie made this one for Black Lion Films and Calendar Productions with a budget of approximately £600,000 and delivered the most politically astute and most prophetic British gangster film, depicting the collision between old-school East End criminal organization and incoming IRA terrorism, while London prepares for economic transformation through Thatcherism and American investment. Bob Hoskins plays Harold Shand, a London crime boss negotiating with American mafia to develop London Docklands, whose empire collapses over a single day as IRA operatives systematically eliminate his organization in retaliation for offense Harold does not understand. What makes The Long Good Friday impossible for Hollywood to replicate is its specificity to British political moment that has no American equivalent, depicting the exact historical juncture when British organized crime's local power structures were being displaced by international terrorism and international capital simultaneously. The film understands that Harold's failure is not personal, but historical, that the world he represents is ending regardless of his individual capabilities, which gives his destruction a tragic dimension that American gangster films rarely achieve because American mythology insists individual agency matters. The film's depiction of IRA terrorism is matter of fact rather than sensationalized, showing bombings and killings as tactical operations rather than as acts of incomprehensible evil, which American cinema post 9/11 could not approach without being accused of terrorist sympathy. The film was made when the IRA was actively conducting operations in Britain, and when depicting them as rational actors pursuing political goals through violence was controversial but possible. Contemporary Hollywood could not depict terrorism with this level of strategic respect without generating immediate backlash. Bob Hoskins' performance creates Harold as a genuinely intelligent businessman, whose criminal methods are simply tools for achieving legitimate goals, making him sympathetic despite his violence. The famous final shot, holding on Hoskins' face in the back of a car as he realizes he is being taken to his execution, runs nearly 2 minutes without dialogue or movement, trusting the actor's face to convey the complete collapse of everything he has built. American cinema would cut that shot, or add music, or provide some release from the tension. Mackenzie simply holds and lets the audience sit in Harold's realization. The film's politics are specifically Thatcherite, depicting the transformation of London from industrial city controlled by local power structures into financial capital controlled by international investment, and showing that transformation as destroying working-class communities while enriching developers who have no loyalty to place or people. That critique of capitalism emerging from a criminal's perspective is specifically British, and would be incomprehensible to American audiences trained to see capitalism and criminality as opposites rather than as variations on the same acquisitive impulse. Number 4, Trainspotting, 1996.
You're a quiet, sensitive type. A little bit crazy, a little bit bad. But hey, don't I...
Danny Boyle made this one for Channel 4 Films, Figment Films, and Noel Gay Motion Picture Company, with a budget of approximately £1,500,000 based on Irvine Welsh's novel, and delivered the most stylistically inventive and most morally complex film about heroin addiction ever made by depicting junkies not as victims or cautionary tales, but as people making rational choice to pursue pleasure, despite cost. Ewan McGregor plays Mark Renton, who opens the film with the famous "Choose Life" monologue, rejecting consumer capitalism in favor of heroin, and who spends the film cycling between using, quitting, relapsing, and eventually betraying his friends to escape Edinburgh with money stolen from drug deal. What makes Trainspotting impossible for Hollywood to replicate is its refusal to condemn its protagonist's choices or to structure addiction as disease requiring treatment and recovery. Renton understands exactly what heroin does to him and chooses it anyway because the alternative, participating in Thatcherite consumer society, seems equally soul-destroying and less immediately pleasurable. American addiction narratives require framing drug use as pathology rather than as choice, which eliminates the film's central provocation that maybe choosing heroin is a rational response to late capitalist meaninglessness. The film's visual style, using Dutch angles, split screens, fantasy sequences, and the infamous dive into the worst toilet in Scotland, creates an aesthetic that celebrates rather than condemns the druggy lifestyle, making addiction look genuinely fun before showing its costs. American films about addiction use visual style to make drugs look unappealing from the start, which is didactic and dishonest about why people use drugs. Boyle shows that heroin feels amazing, which is why people risk everything for it, and trusts audiences to recognize that amazing feeling does not justify the cost without being explicitly told. The film's ending, where Renton steals the money and abandons his friends, including Spud, who trusted him completely, provides no redemption or moral clarity. Renton chooses life, which means choosing consumer capitalism and betraying the only real relationships he has. The film presents this as practical rather than heroic, suggesting that survival requires becoming exactly the kind of person the "choose life" monologue condemned. American screenwriting would require Renton learning something, or changing fundamentally. He simply chooses a different form of selfishness. The Scottish accents and dialect are so thick that the film was subtitled in some American markets, and even with subtitles, the cultural references to Scottish working-class life, to Hibernian football club, to Edinburgh geography and social stratification remain opaque to American audiences. That opacity is not a bug, but a feature. The film's commitment to specificity rather than accessibility that makes it genuine rather than universal. Number 3. Get Carter, 1971.
What the bloody hell's all this? Do you know what the bloody time is? It's 2 o'clock in the bloody morning.
I know.
Well?
Mike Hodges directed this one for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer British Studios with a budget of approximately £750,000 and delivered the most brutally violent and most morally empty British crime film, depicting Newcastle gangster Jack Carter's investigation of his brother's death, with complete absence of redemption, honor, or meaning. Michael Caine plays Carter as a genuinely frightening figure, whose capacity for violence is matched only by his complete lack of moral framework, moving through Newcastle's criminal underworld, methodically killing everyone connected to his brother's murder without achieving anything except additional corpses, including his own. What makes Get Carter impossible for Hollywood to replicate is its presentation of violence as mechanical rather than cathartic, showing Carter killing people with the same emotional investment he brings to ordering drinks, which strips away any pleasure the audience might take in the revenge narrative. American revenge films require emotional investment and ultimate satisfaction. Carter's revenge accomplishes nothing, saves no one, and ends with his own meaningless death on a slag heap. That nihilism is thematically honest about how violence actually operates, but commercially toxic for American audiences expecting payoff. The film's depiction of Newcastle specifically and Northern England generally is crucial to its meaning, showing a post-industrial landscape where traditional industries are dying and organized crime is filling the void, creating an environment where violence is simply business continuation by other means. The film was shot on location in Newcastle using actual locations that were being demolished during production, capturing the city in transition from industrial to post-industrial economy. That documentary element grounds the violence in specific economic conditions rather than treating it as timeless human conflict. Michael Caine's performance strips away every conventionally sympathetic quality, playing Carter as a cold professional killer without the charm or wit that usually makes screen violence palatable. The famous scene where Carter forces a man to drink an entire bottle of whiskey before throwing him off a parking garage is staged without music or dramatic emphasis, simply showing murder as a task being completed. American cinema requires making violence either thrilling or horrifying. Hodges makes it boring, which is more disturbing than either alternative. The film's sexual content, including storyline involving Carter's brother's daughter being coerced into pornography, is presented without the moral outrage that American films would require. Carter is not motivated by righteous anger about exploitation. He simply wants to kill the people responsible because they violated his family, which is a different category of grievance entirely. That distinction between personal and moral motivation is characteristic of British crime cinema's refusal to align criminality with justice. Number 2. If was about 1968.
And Jude, you don't call me sir. Run!
Lindsay Anderson made this one for Paramount British Pictures and Memorial Enterprises, with a budget of approximately £250,000 and delivered the most formally radical and most politically incendiary British film of the decade, depicting public school rebellion that escalates from vandalism through murder to armed insurrection without ever clarifying whether the revolution is real or fantasy. Malcolm McDowell in his film debut plays Mick Travis, a student whose alienation from the school's authoritarian hierarchy leads him and two friends to acquire automatic weapons and open fire on students, parents, and faculty during graduation ceremony. What makes If impossible for Hollywood to replicate is Anderson's deliberate refusal to establish consistent reality, switching randomly between color and black and white footage without narrative justification, including surrealist sequences that may be fantasy or may be real, and building toward climax that feels simultaneously like justified revolution and like psychotic break. American cinema requires establishing clear boundaries between reality and fantasy, so audiences know how to interpret events. Anderson deliberately destroys those boundaries, making interpretation impossible and forcing audiences to confront their own desires about whether they want the violence to be real. The film's structure is divided into titled chapters that reference both classical education and revolutionary pamphlets, creating a formal system that treats public school rebellion as both petty adolescent acting out and genuine political uprising simultaneously. That tonal ambiguity, treating the same events as both ridiculous and deadly serious, is characteristic of Anderson's approach, and completely alien to American filmmaking, which requires committing to either satire or drama. The film's depiction of institutional sadism, showing younger students being abused by prefects in rituals the administration tacitly approves, is specifically British public school experience that has no American equivalent. American private schools have hierarchies, but not the formalized fagging system where younger students are essentially servants to older ones. That specific institutional structure is what creates the conditions for rebellion, and without it, the film's political dimension collapses into generic teen angst. Malcolm McDowell's performance creates Mick as genuinely dangerous rather than sympathetically rebellious, playing him with cold intelligence and capacity for violence that makes the final massacre feel inevitable rather than shocking. American teen rebellion films require making the rebel sympathetic and the institution clearly evil. Anderson makes both rebel and institution products of the same British class system, which means violence is systemic rather than individual and cannot be resolved through personal change. Number 1. A Matter of Life and Death, 1946.
Jude, I'm bailing out, but there's a catch. I've got no parachute. What do you think the next world's like? I'll know soon enough anyway. I'm signing off now, Jude.
Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger made this one for the Archers production company with a budget of approximately £320,000 and delivered what remains the most formally inventive and most emotionally sophisticated meditation on death, love, and national identity that British cinema has produced. David Niven plays Peter Carter, an RAF pilot who should have died when his plane was shot down but survives due to bureaucratic error in the afterlife, and who must argue before a heavenly court for the right to remain alive and marry the American radio operator he fell in love with during his final moments. The film depicts Earth in Technicolor and heaven in black and white, inverting the expected relationship and suggesting that life is more vivid than any afterlife could be. What makes a matter of life and death impossible for Hollywood to replicate is Powell and Pressburger's complete commitment to using cinema's capacity for fantasy and artifice as tools for exploring genuine emotion and political questions, creating film that operates simultaneously as romance, as comedy, as visual experiment, and as serious examination of Anglo-American relations in the immediate post-war period. American cinema in 1946 was committed to realism or to genre clarity. The Archers created something that was neither and both, using Technicolor and matte paintings and elaborate production design to create heaven and earth that were equally artificial and equally real. The film's structure, which treats the heavenly trial as genuine rather than as hallucination or dream, requires audiences to accept impossible premises and follow it to logical conclusions without winking or irony. The prosecutor in Heaven, played by Raymond Massey, argues that Peter's love for June cannot justify disrupting cosmic order, and his arguments are presented as genuinely reasonable rather than as obviously wrong. American fantasy films require clear moral binaries. Powell and Pressburger present Heaven's bureaucracy as neither good nor evil, but simply as operating according to different priorities than human love. The film's politics, depicting a British pilot arguing before an international heavenly court for the right to marry an American woman, are specifically about post-war Anglo-American alliance and about Britain's declining imperial power requiring American partnership. That political subtext is inseparable from the romance and the fantasy, making the film about national identity and international relations through the framework of whether one man lives or dies. American cinema keeps politics and romance in separate categories. Powell and Pressburger understood they were the same thing. The visual invention, including the massive escalator to heaven, the Technicolor / black and white shifts, the frozen time sequences, and Jack Cardiff's extraordinary cinematography, creates a film that looks like nothing else British or American cinema was producing in 1946. The Archers pursued beauty and artifice as tools for truth, rather than as escapes from it, which is fundamentally opposed to Hollywood's relationship to spectacle as entertainment divorced from meaning. These 11 films represent what British cinema achieves when freed from Hollywood's commercial imperatives. Unflinching working-class specificity, improvisational processes incompatible with studio financing, moral ambiguity without redemption, regional authenticity over accessibility, and trust in audiences to tolerate discomfort. Hollywood could remake them with bigger budgets and stars. They would no longer be these films.